Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name is OJ, and today we're going to talk about the most corrupt referees within the sport of mixed martial arts. I thought this video was fitting, seeing as how we are going to UFC Saudi Arabia this week. Some of you may already know this, but these judges may be on something when managing fights in either Saudi Arabia or Abu Dhabi. I'm not saying this excuse I'm not saying this is a issue is exclusive to these two countries alone, but this seems to be more of a common issue when we go to either Saudi Arabia or Abu Dhabi. I don't really know who the UFC are going to bring as judges for the upcoming cards. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to list some of the high profile judges the UFC use in their high profile bouts and explain why each of these guys should be held on notice for pulling some absolute bullshit in the fights that they are managing because these guys have been getting away with this for far too long. Without wasting any more time, let's jump right into the video. Starting off with someone you may know for sure is going to pull out some egregious scorecard out of their ass at any point during the UFC event, Saudi Arabia or UFC 312. Saul Diamato. This absolute gremlin is going to make an egregious fuck up on the scorecards at some point on the cards. I think anyone who's been watching the sport long enough already knows the name Saul Diamato. It's like mentioning Lord Voldemort in the world of Harry Potter because this gremlin bastard can't go one fight card without there being some form of robbery. He was a judge in the previous Saudi Arabia fight card and he robbed Jared Gordon of a decision victory in broad daylight. I don't know how you scored the third round for Nasrat Hakparast in that fight, unless you've been sipping on one too many shots, because one guy's face was completely mangled up. But Diamato gave Nasrat the round because he threw four more strikes than Jared Gordon. This Temu version of Oscar de la Hoya has been a part of so many fucked up scorecards just within the year of 2024. He scored a 30-27 for Ian Gary in his fight with Jeff Neal. He scored a 30-27 for Trey Waters in his fight with Billy Goff. He scored a 29-28 for Daniel Zellhuber in his fight with Esteban Ribovics. And he scored a 48-47 for Juliana Pena in her fight with Raquel Pennington. You can't even stay out of controversy outside of the UFC because he's the one who scored a 48-46 decision for Usman Nurmagomedov in his fight with Paul Hughes during last week's paper PFL event. It is kind of sickening that this is the judge the UFC brings along for a majority of their international fights. Whatever bets you guys have on this week's card, just pray your fighter gets a finish because if the fight goes a distance, Saul Diamato is going to fuck shit up. Next, we have Hadi Mohammed Ali. And after what he did during Rinat Fakhridinov versus Carlos Leal, where he scored the fight for Fakhridinov a 30-27, he will always be under suspicion for corrupt ass bullshit. I don't care if he judges every single fight exactly as I would have judged them for over the next year or so. You can't tell me this guy does not have a bias for Muslim fighters. Just watch Fakhridinov versus Leal alone and ask what rounds did Fakhridinov even win, let alone all three. I don't think he was on the previous Saudi Arabia card, but he lives close by. So what is to say that he isn't the judge featured on UFC Fight Night Saudi Arabia? You ever wonder why most UFC fans claim that judges in Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia are corrupt as shit? It's because of judges like Hadi Mohammed Ali. This fucker embodies every negative stereotype UFC fans have against judges and fighters from the Middle East or Muslim countries. Now, I don't agree with those stereotypes when it specifically comes to judges from Muslim countries, but if the fans want to claim that this worm is a corrupt Muslim judge, I don't see how anyone can refute that claim. Just look at the last UFC event he was asked to judge fights in and ask yourself, has he been able to judge fairly? Next, we have a face that not many of you may be familiar with, Ben Cartilage. If you don't know who this guy is, he was one of the judges who scored for Joe Anderson Brito versus William Gomez, and he scored the fight a 29-28 for William Gomez like an absolute jackass retard. Apparently, a reversal in the last 30 seconds of the third round is greater than 2-3 minutes of control time, according to Cartilage. Now, he hasn't done anything outrageous in his previous tenure at the Saudi Arabia card, but Carlich has done some weird shit throughout 2024. In August of 2024, this guy was working as a judge for Tabitha Ricci versus Angela Hill, and he scored the fight 29-28 for Ricci, which is just criminal. And although a lot of people will not agree with me on this, he's the reason why Dan Hooker was able to win a robbery decision against Mateusz Gamrot at UFC 305. Over the last several months, this guy has been pulling out a lot of controversial scorecards, three within the span of two events. He was in the previous Saudi Arabia card, and he didn't really do anything egregious. But with that being said, I would not be shocked if a controversial scorecard is read out within the next two UFC events, and it happens to include Ben Carlich's name because it's pretty synonymous with corrupt ass bullshit when you hear the name Ben Carlich on a UFC judge's scorecard. This next guy, I don't think he's going to be on either the Saudi Arabia card or UFC 312 because I only hear this guy's name in the US fight cards. But if you don't know who Chris Lee is, he is notorious for being one of the worst judges the UFC brings into judging fights. He's one of the guys who scored a 29-28 for the terrorist known as Mario Bautista in his fight with Jose Aldo. He's also one of the guys who scored against Roman Kopylov in his fight against Cesar Almeida. He scored Muslim Salikov versus Santiago Ponzinibbio to Salikov 29-28. And he scored Tabitha Ricci versus Teacha Pennington a 29-28 for Ricci. Like, this is all within the year of 2024. I think by now you should understand that this guy is an absolute menace when it comes to judging fights. Thankfully, he mostly restricts himself to judging fights within the United States. But if he goes to a Saudi Arabia or an Australia card, I can guarantee that all hell will break loose. And whatever parlay you have locked in over the next few weeks, immediately cancel them the second you hear Chris Lee's name because you don't know how the fight's going to end, seeing as how Chris Lee really likes to go against the grain for some reason. Last but not least, we're going to talk about Dave Torelli. Most of you probably don't know who this guy is, but you will probably remember the absolute stinker he shat out his pants during UFC 302 when judging Sean Strickland versus Paulo Costa. Because this is the retard who scored the fight 49-46 in favor of Paulo Costa. Fortunately for us, the UFC have not called this guy back since UFC 302, but be warned. You see this guy's name, Dave Torelli, judging Sean Strickland's fight next week. Do not even bother to put a parlay for Strickland. Strickland is going to have to knock out Dricus Duplessis in order to fight to be scored a draw. And we all know Strickland ain't knocking out Dricus Duplessis. Therefore, it's pretty guaranteed that Duplessis will win. The only reason I think the UFC will even bring him over to judge fights at this point is to blatantly rig a fight the UFC want to go in their favor because there is no reason for him to be approved to be an MMA judge at this point, seeing the extensive fuck up he had in his maybe second event in the UFC alone. Yeah, that's going to be it for today's video. Let me know in the comments down below which referee you would absolutely be shit scared of to see judging a fight you put a parlay or two in. Keep in mind, there's no way of knowing who's going to be judging on which of the upcoming cards, so this is just a rant about some of the judges the UFC frequently bring over that I would definitely not want to see judging fights anytime soon. Other than that, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.